Welcome to the Bob Hagan Show, sponsored by It's Relevant. I'm your host, Bob Hagan, and the goal of our show is introduce you to the Stamford that we know, the heroes, unsung heroes, and the movers and the shakers of this town and the surrounding communities. I hope you enjoy our show, and thanks for joining in. Thanks for tuning in. Today on the show, I'm honored to have James Vlasto, the Executive Director and Founder of the Homer L. Wise Memorial Committee, along with Stamford Resident Tony Pavia, historian, author of American Town Goes to War, and principal over at Trinity Catholic High School. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being on the show.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Why don't I start off with Homer L. Wise, who he was, if you could talk, Mr. Vlasto, a little bit about the foundation and what you're trying to accomplish here in Stamford.
Certainly, Homer Wise was a very special soldier, and he was born in Louisiana, but he left when he was 14 years old, and joined the Army in 1941, September. Actually, 7 months later, or 8 months later, he met his future wife, Madeline DeSessa of Stanford, on Cape Cod, where he was stationed at Camp Edwards. That's his connection to Stanford very quickly, 1942. He went to North Africa for a while, with mostly training. Saw very little action, if any. And then he was one of the first soldiers to land at the beach at Salerno in September of 1943. And he distinguished himself all the way through the fighting in Italy, all the way north to Rome and Magalino, Italy, where on June 14th, 1944, he was awarded the Medal of Honor.
Wow.
I've read the official accounts and unofficial accounts of that battle, and it shows to me that he was in terrible danger, but he was able to inspire the men behind him and save the battalion, which was about to be overrun by German forces. German forces at that time of the place in Italy were very experienced and very good defensive fighters. So Homer's experience that day saved a lot of lives, and of course his commanders recognized that.
You read the citation, just and you say, wow, and you're looking at the heroism side of it. Then you sit down and you think about physically what it took, physically what it took to do what he did within that period of time. It would take an Olympic athlete.
If you read the last part of the citation, besides using a rifle, which he killed 3 German soldiers with because they came from behind him, but he switched to a Browning automatic, BIR. He went to a submachine gun, and he went to a rifle grenade launcher, and the 5th was a tank. He got on top of a tank with a 50 caliber machine gun, which had jammed. He unjammed it. And fired 750 rounds, which drove the Germans back. But you see, he had to be strong to do those things.
Same guy who came back here and was described, without exception, as being a gentleman.
But he was a very common man, wouldn't you say? I mean, there was nothing...
Yes, he was very quiet. When he came home, when he was presented the Medal of Honor, on November the 28th, 1944, the General Patch, who was a commander in general of the 7th Army, presented the medal to him in France. He pulled him aside and said, Sergeant, we want you to stay in the Army, and I'm ready to raise your rank to captain. And he said, Captain, thank you very much, General, but I'd rather be a live sergeant than a dead captain. And then he was on his way back. And the only thing he said after that, he said, I want to go back to Stanford to be with my fiancée.
Gotcha.
That's the kind of man he was.
Sure.
No parades.
It really kind of draws me back to a question with you, Tony. You've had the privilege to talk with many veterans, both men and women. What separates, what makes a common man have uncommon valor from what you've seen?
Well, it's almost impossible to explain what separates a Homer Lee Wise and what he did from everyone else. And I don't have the answer to that. I do know that in every single instance, there are people who take initiative, jump in, and don't weigh the risk to their own lives and do heroic things. Having said that, I'm also of the belief that that entire generation who went to that war were heroes. And I'm also of the belief that they were ordinary people who became extraordinary. I talk about this all the time. They were young men and women who were raised in a democratic society. They didn't have the fanatical upbringing and the fanatical training that the Japanese and the Germans had, and very few people gave them a chance of defeating these fanatical, well-trained troops, but they did. And they did because, in my opinion, they rose to the challenge in hundreds and thousands and millions of individual instances. They became extraordinary, and that's what won the war. It wasn't the generals, it wasn't the commanders, it wasn't the politicians that won the war. It was the guys who were on the line day in and day out, who were extraordinary. At the same time, Homer Lee Wise wouldn't be the Homer Lee Wise that we've come to know without the ingredient of humility. People urged me to write about him. I didn't know him. I would never have the opportunity to meet with him, and the closest I could come to was meeting and talking to his wife. But one after another, veterans, he was a veteran's veteran, he was a soldier's soldier, urged me to write something about him, not only because he was in that rarefied air of being a Medal of Honor recipient, but because he was the person he was. And he was so humble about this. He was never totally comfortable with the celebrity that came with that. And his wife told me in extraordinary detail how people would approach him all the time, as you would expect, wanting to shake the hand of a Medal of Honor winner, a recipient wanting to thank him, just wanting to meet greatness. He was never comfortable with it. He really brushed those kinds of things off. But the true measure of the man to me is that part of his popularity and part of his fame came from his humility. A guy who had every reason to flaunt his credentials, but who wouldn't think of doing that. I just, if this were today, he would be a celebrity, the likes of which we haven't seen in decades. He really would. Rather than that, he chose to remain this quiet, humble person who came back, lived in the town, contributed to the town, and died at a young age, too soon, as a matter of fact. He
said 57.
57?
You know, he had so much to teach children, and he died in an era when we weren't bringing veterans into school. Today, every school does it. You know, just think of the possibilities to have this man, you know, be able to come in and talk with young people and what he could have inspired.
Tell me more about the committee. What are we moving here to honor this great hero? What are we doing, and how can we get the information out?
Well, 4 years ago, we created the Homer L. Wise Memorial Committee. Tony Pavia is a member, and we have a very distinguished board, the members of the committee who either knew Homer or had some kind of relationship with him. And we have undertaken a major effort since 2008 to raise about $100,000. We are to erect the statue. The statue is completed, but the bills are not completed yet.
Is there an address for the audience here that you can send if they?
Yes, it's very simple. Homer L. Wise Memorial Committee,
Okay.
care of Gene Rinaldi, Rinaldi, 21 Fairmont Avenue. That's Stamford, 06906. She is the president of the Homer L. Wise Memorial Committee.
What's the website address?
Sergeant Homer L. Wise Memorial.org. And it has all the videos and pictures It also has a donate section where you can, online donations. 35% of our donations have come from online contributors, especially people all around the country.
What's the end goal? When the donations are all done, the statue's complete, and I know it's
Storage right now.
right now in storage and all that. Where are you planning, Tony, to put it?
Well, we have picked out tentatively a very nice place in Veterans Park.
Wonderful.
And
Stamford.
it'll be, yes, and it'll be a great place. Homer actually worked in this building for a while, so I imagine that
Oh, yes, a number of years.
I imagine that he made many trips across the street when that was the service role. And so it's really at a great place in the park, and it'll be a place that hopefully will get a lot of foot traffic and will attract a whole new generation of young people. Again, people have a short memory, and when the greatest generation moves on, there is a danger that the new generation won't know who this man was. So the statue is a very important part of preserving the history of Stamford and the memory of Homer Wise. The great thing about the statue
Take a look at the
is
statue. Have you seen the statue?
the statue
On site?
really,
On the website?
it's almost perfect in its form because it depicts, you see all of the traits in that statue. You see the hero, the incredible physical specimen, and at the same time you see the citizen soldier. You do. It's
No guns.
Nothing. It's
No helmets,
just,
nothing.
It captures him.
How's what the committee's doing with Homer L. Wise fit into the overall culture and history of the city of Stamford?
Well, I think the answer is twofold. Number one, if you study history the way I do, you believe that history is really the story of people, important people. In the history of Stamford, Homer Lee Wise is one of a small group of people who are truly significant to the history of Stamford. He's one of only 2 Medal of Honor recipients in in Stamford's history. And I would argue he was more of Stamford than John Latham was. Secondly, I think Homer Lee Wise represents much more than Homer Lee Wise. Homer Lee Wise represents a generation of people. He represents their courage, their heroism, their sacrifice. And I've always said he is a perfect model of citizen soldier. So when we honor Homer Lee Wise, we're also honoring every person, the 10,000 people from Stamford who served their country in the Second World War. I think the danger is that as the World War II generation begins to fade away, and they're dying at an alarming rate, 1,000 a day if you believe that number, it's critically important that future generations preserve this memory, that they know who he is. Homer Lee Wise should be embedded in the education of every student in Stamford, and as should the war be embedded in the consciousness of every child who goes through the Stamford public schools and private schools. So I really believe that this statue is an important way to re-energize and rediscover Homer Lee Wise and Stamford's contributions during World War II.
Again, as I said, the show that we talk about really is geared towards the unsung heroes and the heroes and the influencers, and you both are credits to restoring and continuing the name of Homer Lee Wise, one of our true heroes in American history. And I want to thank you for taking time to come on my show, just to let the people of Stamford and the surrounding towns know about this extraordinary individual. Mr. Vlasto, Tony, thank you so much for being on the show. We really appreciate it. Take care.